It's sage butter.
What?
Your secret ingredient.
Why do you have to ruin the surprise?
Because no one likes clickbait.
Okay, but
Roll the tape. So as Korin has so rudely pointed out, we're going to be spiking a pumpkin roll with sage butter. This is going to give it a really nice herbaceous pop that'll play super well with the pumpkin cake. So the first thing you want to do is get yourself a baking pumpkin, or a sugar pumpkin, or a pie pumpkin. They're the same thing. Why there are three names for this thing is beyond me. Start off by attempting to cut into it with your cheap knife. When that doesn't work, give it a shot with your cheap serrated knife. Finally, give up and grab one of your good knives and slice the stem off. Then cut your Halloween gourd in two. I'd say half, but those are very obviously not halves. Use a scoop to scoop out its brains like a psychopath, and carelessly discard them like a sociopath. Since cats are both of these things, Korin now wants a part of the action. Sprinkle a few pinches of kosher salt on your pumpkin portions. Anyway, salt those bad boys and place them on a baking sheet. Roast at 400 degrees for 30 to 45 minutes, or until they can be stabbed with a paring knife with no resistance. Of course, if you don't want to deal with all the pumpkin prep, a can of pumpkin puree will work perfectly fine. While Billy Corgan is roasting in the oven, it's time to make our pumpkin spice blend. It's important to note here that there's nothing in my spice grinder. It's not even plugged in. I just forgot to record while I was actually grinding my spices. Anyway, this blend is 1/4 cup ground cinnamon, 2 tablespoons ground ginger, 4 teaspoons ground nutmeg, 2 teaspoons of ground allspice, and 2 teaspoons of ground cloves. This is going to yield quite a bit more than what we'll actually need for the recipe, so you can set it aside and use it for things like coffee if you're a basic bitch like me. Of course, you can totally get away with just buying a spice blend from the grocery store. I won't judge you, I just like doing everything from scratch. Now it's time for our not so secret anymore ingredient. Thanks, Korin. F you. I don't have an exact measurement of sage here. You know those blister packs you get from the grocery store? About half one of those. Combine the sage with a whole ass stick of butter in a saucepan over medium-low. Take care to whisk frequently and cook until the butter just starts to brown. Remove it from the burner and set it aside to cool. Around this time, your little jack-o'-lantern that couldn't should be ready to pull from the oven. These pieces are pretty hot, so hold them with a towel and use a spoon to scoop the insides into a food processor. Promptly turn around to look at your stove and realize you've burned your sage butter. After you remake your sage butter, puree your pumpkin guts, stopping once or twice to scrape down the sides with a rubber spatula. This will help ensure that it all gets blended smoothly. Set it aside and get ready to make some cake. Now, I love this pumpkin cake because it's super simple and super tasty. Start off by whisking together 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour, a half teaspoon of baking powder, a half teaspoon of baking soda, 2 teaspoons of the pumpkin spice blend, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Then, in a separate bowl, whisk together 3 eggs and a cup of granulated sugar until the mixture is thickened. Add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract and 2/3 of a cup of the pumpkin puree and whisk again. What you do with the rest of the pumpkin is none of my business. Finally, fold your dry mix into the batter and mix until it's just combined. The end result should be lumpy but with no bits of dry flour. Now, before we turn the batter onto our baking sheet, it's super important to line it with parchment paper first. Flick some water onto the baking sheet so that the paper sticks in place, and make sure that you have some of the paper hanging off the side. Otherwise, you're going to have a real bad time trying to remove it later. Pour the cake batter onto the baking sheet and use a spatula to spread it down evenly. Bake at 375 degrees for about 15 minutes or until the cake springs back when you touch it. Okay, so now it's time to move quickly because this has to be done while the cake is still hot. Using a bit of the parchment paper hanging off the end, slide the cake off of the baking sheet. Carefully begin to roll the cake, taking care to leave the parchment paper on. If this gets too hot, use a towel to hold the cake. Once it's all rolled up, set it aside, seam side down, and allow it to cool completely. While your pumpkin spliff is cooling off, combine in a bowl 1 softened block of cream cheese, 1 cup of sifted powdered sugar, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Then, strain your sage butter in and stir until it's smooth and incorporated. Now that your cake tube is cooled completely, carefully unroll it. Don't fret if it has a couple of cracks, that's totally workable. Spread your filling across the whole thing, leaving some space around the edges so that it doesn't squeeze out the side when you roll it up. Speaking of which, roll it back up. This time though, peel the parchment paper back as you roll it. Now that you've finished rolling your pumpkin blunt, wrap it in plastic and refrigerate it for at least 1 hour. After a very impatient hour, remove your cream cheese joint from the fridge, cut it in half to get that gorgeous cross section, and give it a final dusting of powdered sugar. Slice yourself off a piece, or just dig directly into a fork, I won't judge you, and enjoy! Now, if you like this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more recipes. If you have an idea for something I should make, leave it in the comments. And don't forget, you can follow me on Twitch and join my Discord if you want to talk about cooking, gaming, or just hang out and chat. Links, as always, are in the description down below.